Hey future seekers, tonight we begin with a mystery that has whispered across time through stone and sand, through stars and stories. When you type the speed of light into Google, something unusual happens. The number points directly to the coordinates of the Great Pyramid of Giza. A coincidence, some say. But others pause and wonder, could this monument, older than many civilizations, hold secrets far beyond what history books tell us? The Great Pyramid rises from the desert floor, aligned with an accuracy modern engineers still admire. Its sides almost perfectly face true north, better than the Paris Observatory, built with far more advanced tools. Its base is so level that even today laser equipment struggles to match its precision, and the three pyramids together reflect Orion's belt, as if stone and starlight were meant to mirror each other. So, who built these colossal monuments? Were they the work of ancient Egyptians, of a forgotten civilization, or perhaps of something beyond Earth? Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these stories, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore the timeless mystery of the pyramids. Chapter 1. A desert of stone and silence. Imagine for a moment the silence of the Giza Plateau thousands of years ago. No bustling city nearby, no highways, no glowing lights on the horizon. Just sand stretching endlessly, the desert wind carrying grains across the land, and the Nile River flowing steady in the distance. Out of this stillness a monument rises, stone upon stone, block upon block, until a geometric mountain stands, perfect in symmetry. The Great Pyramid. For millennia it has stood as though defying time itself. The sheer scale is staggering. Each block averages 2.5 tons, and some weigh up to 70 tons. Over 2 million of them were stacked together, creating a structure that once reached nearly 481 feet into the sky. The tallest human-made structure in the world for more than 3,800 years. But here lies the question: how? If we imagine ourselves in that time, there are no cranes, no bulldozers, no diesel engines. The wheel is known, but not used in this construction. And yet, the pyramid stands, its sides aligned to the cardinal directions, its base nearly flawless, and its chambers constructed with mathematical precision that encodes measurements of the Earth itself. Some scholars believe the Egyptians used sledges and ramps, pouring water over sand to make it firm enough for workers to drag each massive block. Experiments in Japan showed that 18 men could move a 2.5-ton stone with effort. Multiply that by millions, and you can almost see the endless lines of labourers pulling ropes, chanting in rhythm, hauling stones as the desert sun blazed above. Others say the scale is too vast, too precise for manpower alone. Could there have been techniques we've forgotten? Tools that left no trace? Or perhaps knowledge of physics we underestimate? In many ways, the pyramid feels less like a tomb and more like a message. Its dimensions are exact, as though inscribed with a code meant for the future. The length of its sides encodes the circumference of the Earth. Its height encodes the distance between the Earth and the Sun, and the 8 subtle sides of its base, visible only during the equinox, suggest an understanding of astronomy and geometry far beyond what we imagine for that time. And so, as we begin this journey, we ask the first and most important question. Were the Egyptians truly the builders of this wonder, or were they inheritors of something older, something forgotten? The desert does not give up its secrets easily. The sands bury, the winds erase, and yet the pyramid remains, silent, waiting. Chapter 2. The Alien and Giant Theories. As night deepens and the mind drifts, it is easy to see how the pyramids invite wonder. Their shape, their endurance, their sheer improbability, these are qualities that stir the imagination. The Great Pyramid rises silently from the sands, a perfect geometric monument that seems to defy time and gravity. When one gazes upon it, it is almost impossible not to ask, in a quiet and contemplative voice, how such a structure could have been built. Its precise angles, its flawless alignment with the cardinal directions, the way it mirrors the stars above, all suggest an intelligence at work, a knowledge far beyond what ordinary tools and techniques could achieve. For some, the explanation must lie beyond human hands, and it is here that one of the most fascinating and controversial ideas emerges, that the pyramids may have been created not solely by the Egyptians, but with guidance, or even labour, from beings not of this world. The alien theory begins with a simple observation. The Great Pyramid is not merely a building, it is a cosmic marker. Its alignment with true north is astonishingly precise, so exact that even modern compasses, without the aid of satellites, could not match it. Its placement mirrors the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and its proportions seem to encode planetary measurements, the circumference and radius of the Earth quietly whispered in stone. For those who believe in extraterrestrial influence, this precision raises a quiet, compelling question. How could humans, thousands of years ago, achieve such feats without telescopes, compasses, or advanced mathematics? The answer, they suggest, lies in the stars. Some propose that visitors from other worlds may have come to Earth in ages long before recorded history. These beings, luminous and intelligent, shared knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and energy with early humans. They did not command, they did not enslave, they guided, taught, and inspired. Perhaps the pyramids were built with their assistance, not merely as tombs or ceremonial structures, but as proof of a contact between worlds. In this theory, monuments such as the pyramids, Stonehenge, and the Moai of Easter Island are not isolated marvels, but part of a subtle global pattern, a fingerprint left upon Earth by knowledge from beyond our world. They whisper a quiet story of contact, of guidance, and of inspiration, a story that invites the mind to imagine a universe larger and more mysterious than our daily lives suggest. Picture, then, an ancient night where a soft, strange light illuminates the desert horizon. Perhaps a celestial object moves with purpose, or perhaps a craft hovers silently above the sands. People gather, staring upward, awe in their eyes. From this light emerge beings not fully human, not frightening, but radiant and graceful. They teach without words, showing patterns, demonstrating geometry, pointing to the stars, guiding human hands to lift stones, align the pyramids, and craft structures that mirror the heavens. This vision is almost like poetry, humanity's first classroom beneath the stars, where knowledge is shared not by force or decree, but by quiet wonder, by gentle inspiration, and by the patient guidance of beings attuned to forces both seen and unseen. Closely linked to this vision of extraterrestrial assistance is another story, one rooted in myth and legend rather than other worlds, a story of giants. Across cultures and continents, tales of humans of extraordinary size and strength appear. In the Hebrew Bible, there are the Nephilim, described as giants walking the earth before and after the Great Flood. In Greek mythology, Titans shaped the world before the Olympian gods came to reign. African and Native American traditions speak of colossal humans whose presence inspired awe, and whose strength made the impossible seem natural. Could it be, some wonder, that giants once walked among ordinary humans, performing feats beyond the capability of any normal person? Consider the challenge of pyramid construction. A Japanese experiment showed that 18 men could move a single 2.5-ton block with great effort. Now, imagine the stones of the Great Pyramid, each weighing up to 70 tons, lifted over 300 feet into the air with incredible precision. Even today, modern cranes struggle to achieve such a task. For believers in the giant hypothesis, the answer is simple and elegant. Extraordinary humans, giants in size and strength, carried out the work that ordinary humans could not. It is a quiet and almost dreamlike thought, one that invites the mind to wander into a world where strength, skill, and determination manifest in ways that stretch our imagination and expand our understanding of what might once have been possible. Of course, mainstream archaeology offers a grounded perspective. No evidence of alien technology has been discovered in the sands of Egypt, and no skeletal remains of giants have been found to support these stories. Yet, the allure of these theories does not fade. They persist not because of proof, but because they inspire curiosity and imagination. They remind us that the past is a vast ocean, and we, in our small boats of understanding, float upon its surface, seeking glimpses of what lies beneath. Whether extraterrestrial whispered secrets to early humans, or giants lifted massive stones with ease, or whether these stories are symbolic echoes of lost knowledge, the pyramids continue to invite us to look beyond ourselves, to imagine mysteries that reach far beyond our daily lives, and to marvel at the possibilities of a universe greater than we can fully comprehend. Let us now drift into a story that could have been told beside desert fires thousands of years ago. A group of workers, weary from a long day of labour, sits beneath the stars. The air's cool, carrying the faint scent of stone and sand. Their bodies rest, muscles aching, as they look upward to the heavens where Orion's belt glimmers quietly. One of them points to the stars, his voice soft and reverent. "See how the stones above match the stones we raise," he whispers, the words barely stirring the stillness of the night. Another smiles, a gentle chuckle escaping him. Perhaps it is the gods, or perhaps the ones who come from the stars. They fall into a silence that is rich, expansive, and alive with thought. In that silence, imagination grows louder than words, questions bloom quietly, and the mind wanders into possibilities beyond comprehension. Perhaps, for them as for us, the question matters more than the answer. Who truly placed the design of the heavens upon the earth? And in that quiet reflection, we find a gentle truth. Perhaps the mystery itself, the contemplation, and the wonder it inspires are more important than any explanation we might discover. The pyramids, silent and enduring beneath the vast desert sky, remain a reminder that some mysteries are meant not to be solved, but to guide the mind gently toward awe, curiosity, and quiet reflection. The alien and giant theories are not meant to close the debate, but to open the mind, to allow us to dream as we wonder. As the night continues, so too does our journey, moving from the realm of speculation into the heart of history itself. Because while many dream of otherworldly hands, others argue the truth lies closer to home, in the ingenuity, strength, and determination of the ancient Egyptians. Chapter 3. The Ancient Egyptians and the Mainstream View. Let us drift deeper into the sands of time, where imagination meets evidence, and myth blends with memory. While some whisper of giants and others dream of beings from beyond the stars, many scholars and historians anchor their explanations here, in the hands and minds of the ancient Egyptians themselves. It is a view both humble and extraordinary, for it asks us to look not at the supernatural, but at human will and ingenuity stretched to its limits. The Greek historian Herodotus, travelling centuries after the pyramids were raised, wrote of 400,000 men working in shifts, labouring for decades to bring the monument of Khufu to life. Imagine this scene: vast camps spread across the desert, lines of workers extending for miles, their voices rising in chants as they pull ropes around massive stone blocks. The air filled with the sound of wooden sledges dragging across the sand, the hiss of water poured over the ground to reduce friction, and the steady beat of drums to keep thousands of men moving in unison. The Great Pyramid contains 2.2 million stone blocks, covering over 13 acres, its sides stretching 755 feet each. The height rose to nearly 481 feet, taller than any structure humans would build again until the 1800s. To think of this in scale. Picture a city skyline. Then imagine that same profile in the heart of the desert 4,000 years ago, a mountain built by human hands. The sheer determination required is staggering. And yet, the Egyptians were not strangers to the challenges of stone. They had already mastered quarrying, transport, and construction. They built temples, obelisks, and smaller pyramids before Khufu's. The Great Pyramid, in this sense, was not a miracle that appeared suddenly. It was the culmination of centuries of refinement. Evidence suggests they built long ramps of packed earth and stone, stretching for miles, to haul blocks upward as the pyramid rose. Others argue they may have wound the ramp around the pyramid itself, spiralling upward. Recently, archaeologists uncovered an ancient system of canals and boat pits near Giza, hinting that some stones may have been transported by water, floated on barges along branches of the Nile that reach closer to the plateau. Imagine the sight: heavy limestone blocks gliding on the river, sails billowing gently, men steering them toward the banks where ramps waited. And yet, questions remain. How did they lift granite beams weighing 70 tons more than 300 feet into the air? How did they achieve measurements so exact that even today, their base is level to within fractions of an inch? These feats seem nearly impossible without advanced machinery, but perhaps the answer lies in persistence, organisation, and time. With enough workers, enough rope, enough wood, and enough decades, the impossible becomes possible. What is perhaps most fascinating is what we do not find. The Great Pyramid, supposedly a tomb, contains no body, no mummy of Khufu, no inscriptions celebrating the afterlife, no paintings or treasures, nothing of the kind we find in the richly decorated tombs of the Valley of the Kings. The chambers inside are bare: stark stone walls, empty sarcophagi, silent passageways. This absence fuels doubt. If the pyramid was truly built for a king, why does it feel more like a machine, a structure designed with purpose beyond burial? The Egyptians left detailed records of their culture, their gods, their ceremonies, their daily lives. Yet for the pyramids, silence. Still, the mainstream view remains steady. The Egyptians, they say, built them. They used tools of copper and stone, sledges and rollers, sweat and coordination. They carved, they dragged, they placed, and they achieved what no one else has since. Their motivation was spiritual as much as practical. To build a pyramid was to connect heaven and earth, to honour the gods, to ensure the eternal journey of their pharaoh. The pyramid was both monument and prayer, a mountain pointing to the stars. The workers too were not merely slaves as once believed, but skilled labourers who rotated in and out, housed in nearby barracks, fed with bread and beer. Excavations have found bakeries, breweries, and evidence of organised communities around the construction site. This was not only a feat of engineering, but of logistics, feeding and managing tens of thousands of men for decades. The sheer coordination required is astonishing, a kind of ancient project management on a scale that rivals our largest modern endeavours. So perhaps the truth lies not in giants or aliens, but in something more human, and perhaps more inspiring. That people, with nothing but simple tools and boundless will, created a structure that defies time. It is humbling to think that what we sometimes dismiss as primitive may in fact have been extraordinary mastery of resources, persistence, and imagination. And yet, even as we acknowledge this achievement, the questions do not vanish. The empty chambers, the precision measurements, the alignments with the stars, all whisper of something more, something that stretches beyond a simple tomb. Some see the hand of forgotten civilizations, others see hidden knowledge, and still others wonder if the pyramid was never truly about death at all, but about life, energy, and the cosmos itself. As the desert night deepens and the stars wheel overhead, one truth remains. The Great Pyramid stands as a mirror of human mystery. Whether by alien guidance, giant hands, or Egyptian labourers under the sun, it continues to provoke awe. And in its silence, it invites us onward, to ask not only how it was built, but why. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Lost Civilization. As we drift deeper into the sands of history, we arrive at a theory that feels both haunting and beautiful. That the pyramids were not built solely by the Egyptians, but are the inheritance of a forgotten world, a world erased by time, by catastrophe, and by silence, leaving behind only stone as a whisper of its greatness. This is the theory of a lost civilization. When we look at the Great Pyramid, certain mysteries resist simple explanation. Take the King's Chamber, for example. Above it rest massive granite beams, each weighing more than 70 tons. These beams were somehow lifted more than 350 feet into the air, stacked with care, locked into place with perfect balance. Even modern machinery would struggle with such a task, and yet these beams rest in harmony, as if effortlessly placed. How did a civilization without cranes, pulleys of iron, or steel tools achieve this? For those who believe in a forgotten culture, the answer is simple. They had knowledge we have lost. The British author Graham Hancock has long argued this point. He suggests that the pyramids are not monuments of Khufu's reign, but relics of a culture far older, one that lived and thrived before a great cataclysm struck the earth. He points to the precision, the astronomy, and the symbolism as fingerprints of a civilization erased from history. If we follow this idea, the Egyptians we know, the civilization of pharaohs, temples, and hieroglyphs, were not the builders, but the inheritors, finding these structures already ancient in their own time and adapting them for their own use. Evidence supporting this view can be seen not only in the pyramids, but also in the Sphinx. The body of the Sphinx shows signs of water erosion, deep channels carved by rainfall, not sandstorms. But rainfall of that kind has not touched the Giza Plateau since the end of the last ice age, nearly 12,000 years ago. If the Sphinx is truly that old, then so too may be the pyramids beside it. This places their origin far earlier than official records allow, into a time when mainstream history tells us humans were still hunter-gatherers. Could it be that an advanced culture existed then, one capable of architecture, engineering, and science at a scale we struggle to comprehend? Imagine such a world. Cities rising along fertile river valleys before the seas rose, stone monuments gleaming beneath constellations that looked slightly different than they do today. A culture deeply in tune with the earth, building not merely to house kings, but to align with stars, to encode knowledge, to preserve wisdom for the future. And then suddenly a disaster. Perhaps a comet strike, a solar storm, or the floods that swept across the globe at the end of the Ice Age. The cities erased, the knowledge scattered, the survivors forced to rebuild with fragments of memory. In this telling, the pyramids are not tombs at all, but time capsules. They carry within their design the measure of the Earth's circumference, the ratio of its radius, even the speed of a light hidden within its coordinates. Too much precision to be chance. As if the builders knew their world would vanish, and so they left behind monuments that could speak to future generations, should they ever relearn how to listen. Critics argue there is little hard evidence for such a civilization. They say we find no writing, no tools, no settlements advanced enough to prove it. But perhaps stone is the only material that could endure 12,000 years of flood, fire and erosion. Wood rots, metal rusts, papyrus crumbles, but stone remains. And what remains most powerfully on the Giza Plateau is not a story of kings, but of permanence, of precision, of messages too vast to ignore. A gentle story echoes here. Imagine an elder of this forgotten culture walking with his child beneath the night sky. He points to Orion's belt, bright against the darkness, and then to the rising walls of a pyramid, still under construction. "We build not for us," he whispers, "but for them. For those who will come when we are gone." The child nods, too young to understand, but already knowing that stone is stronger than memory. Perhaps that is the truth of the pyramids. Whether or not this lost civilization truly existed, the theory itself invites us to widen our perspective. It reminds us that history is not fixed but fluid, and that the story of humanity may stretch back further, deeper, and more mysteriously than we allow. The pyramids, silent and eternal, may be the last voice of a world that once dreamed as we dream, hoped as we hope, and left behind a gift for us to find. And so, as the desert wind whispers against their walls and the stars shine as they did thousands of years ago, we are left with a thought both humbling and profound. Perhaps the pyramids are not only monuments of the past but bridges across time, connecting us to a civilization that slipped beneath the waves of history, but whose echoes still call to us in stone. Chapter 5. Of Slaves, Grain, and Sacred Labour. As the moon rides higher and our voices grow softer, we turn now to stories written in sacred texts and whispered in family lore, stories that link the pyramids to the people of Israel. These tales have threaded through millennia, shaping how many have imagined the builders of stone, a people pressed to work under the hand of a pharaoh, piling blocks for monuments that would later stand as monuments to their suffering. It is a story powerful in its simplicity, and it deserves a careful, gentle look. The biblical account describes Israelite labour under an Egyptian yoke. For generations, this image has been compelling. Millions of people hauling stone, building monuments for a foreign king. It fits a moral narrative and explains the existence of immense labour forces. Over time, some have tried to place this narrative directly at the feet of the pyramids. The idea that it was the Israelites who moved those millions of stones, turning the Great Pyramid into a symbol of bondage. There are variations within this idea. One thread connects the figure of Joseph, who rose from prisoner to Pharaoh's steward in the Bible, to the pyramids as storage facilities. The story goes like this. Joseph interpreted dreams and advised Pharaoh to save grain during 7 years of plenty, so the country could survive 7 years of famine. Some have suggested, rather fancifully, that the pyramids were not tombs at all but vast granaries, designed to store the nation's harvest for lean years. This notion was given renewed attention in modern times by public figures who pointed to pits and storage facilities at archaeological sites like Saqqara, along with inscriptions referencing food distribution, as possible evidence that stone structures had agricultural functions. Another voice in this conversation is Imhotep, the architect behind the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. He was deified in later ages as a sage and healer, and some observers noticed parallels, an intelligent advisor to a ruler, building grain-related structures and advising on famine. For those inclined towards symbolic readings, Imhotep nods like a figure out of scripture, lending an air of plausibility to the idea that monumental structures could serve multiple civil purposes, including storage or administration. And yet the currents of archaeology and chronology flow in a different direction. The pyramids of Giza, especially the Great Pyramid attributed to Khufu, are dated by a variety of methods to around 2580 to 2560 BCE. The most commonly accepted dates for the Exodus, if one reads certain biblical chronologies literally, place it much later, across a wide range of scholarly estimates, often in the 2nd millennium BCE. That gap produces a tension that is hard to reconcile. The time when the pyramids were built does not comfortably overlap with the most likely dates for large-scale Israelite presence in Egypt. Put gently, the math of time is stubborn. Archaeological evidence has also shifted the story away from the image of endless slave labour. Excavations have revealed the remains of well-fed, organised work crews near the plateau, bakeries, breweries and dormitory-like barracks. Graffiti left by workers' gangs, with names and markings, suggests pride and identity rather than anonymous slavery. Tombs of skilled labourers were found, given proper burials and honours that would be unlikely for a permanently enslaved workforce. These discoveries invite a new picture, one of rotating labour, specialised craftsmen, and a society capable of mobilising and sustaining large construction projects through complex logistics, not merely through coercion. The grain storage idea, while poetic, encounters practical difficulties when applied to the Great Pyramid itself. Its internal layout, narrow passages, steep descending corridors, and chambers sealed with massive stones, does not resemble a functional granary. Grain needs ventilation, access, and protection from moisture and pests. A sealed stone labyrinth is the opposite of an ideal storage house. However, the existence of genuine granaries and storage pits in other parts of ancient Egypt is well attested, and this truth may have seeded the metaphor that somehow reached modern imaginations. In other words, the people of ancient Egypt certainly stored grain, just probably not inside the king's chamber. Where then does this leave the story of the Israelites and the pyramids? Perhaps best understood as a convergence of memory, metaphor, and moral narrative. The Exodus story is a central defining myth for a people, filled with moral meaning and national identity. It may well echo real experiences of hard labour, foreign rule and migration, but to anchor those memories to the massive, precise work of the Giza Plateau is to reach across millennia and interpret the archaeological record through the prism of later texts. There is also a more delicate historical possibility. The Israelites may have laboured on Egyptian construction projects later than the building of the Great Pyramid, contributing to temples, fortifications, and other monumental works. Records and evidence of large-scale forced labour do exist at points in Egyptian history, and populations were often moved or conscripted for state needs. In that sense, the biblical memory of hard labour in Egypt could reflect real episodes of oppression, without necessarily identifying the pyramids as the stage for that drama. Allow yourself for a moment to imagine a quiet scene, a family in low light, a father returning from a day of back-breaking work on some distant state project, bringing a small portion of bread. Around their table, a child asks about the enormous stones they heard about in tales. The father, tired and tender, says little, but later in the night he tells tales that pass into song. Those songs grow, are adapted, and travel with families as they move. Over generations, the memory swells into myth. The myth becomes scripture, and the scripture becomes the lens through which future generations look back. Memory softens and magnifies at once. Ultimately, the link between the Israelites and the pyramids is a story that illuminates more about human memory the need for meaningful narratives, and the moral force of myth than it does about stone-lifting techniques. It reminds us that ancient monuments are not only archaeological structures but also canvases upon which peoples paint their histories and hopes. So as we rest deeper into the night, the whispered truths remain. The pyramids might not be the warehouses of Joseph, and they probably were not built by enslaved Israelites hauling every block. Yet the human experience behind the biblical tale, the pain, the labour, the yearning for freedom, remains real and worthy of compassion. These layers of story and evidence together form a richer picture, one that honours both hard facts and the persistence of human memory. Chapter 6. Tesla's Dream and the Pyramid as a Power Plant. As the night deepens and our breaths slow, let us follow a different thread, one that ties stone to current, geometry to vibration, and an inventor's quiet dream to the hulking silhouette of a pyramid. This is a chapter about possibility, about how curious minds see patterns and ask what if. It begins with a man who listened to the hum of the world and imagined it singing back, Nikola Tesla. Tesla moved through the late 19th and early 20th centuries like a comet, brilliant, eccentric, and always a little out ahead of his era. He believed the Earth itself could be coaxed into carrying electricity. He imagined towers that would tap into natural resonances, that would breathe energy into the sky and allow power to move without wires. Wardenclyffe Tower was his experiment in that dream, a lattice of wood and copper rising toward the sky, designed to couple with the planet's natural oscillations and deliver energy across distance. The idea was audacious because it asked us to think of the world not as inert matter, but as a participant in a system of vibrations and flows. When people consider the pyramids through this lens, a strange symmetry appears. The Great Pyramid is constructed from materials, limestone but also quartz-bearing granite, that under pressure and vibration can produce electrical effects. Quartz is piezoelectric. When mechanical stress is applied, a small electrical charge can be generated. Granite too contains minerals that can release electrons when vibrated. These physical properties are not mystical. They are material facts. What becomes speculative and compelling is the proposition that the pyramids were designed, intentionally or incidentally, to concentrate, amplify, or channel natural energies in ways that ancient builders understood differently than we do. Various theories weave these facts into larger tapestries. Some suggest chambers and passages acted like acoustic resonators, where sound waves were focused in harmonic frequencies. Others imagine water and air moving through sealed cavities producing chemical reactions that released gases, which then interacted with the stone to create electrical phenomena. The idea continues. If a central chamber were tuned to a particular frequency, one near a musical note like 440 Hz, it might act as a node, focusing vibrational energy that could be harnessed. In this gentle imagining, the pyramid becomes less a tomb and more a kind of instrument or engine, tuned to the planet and to the sky. In the early 20th century, Tesla's Wardenclyffe attempted something similar on a modern scale, harnessing Earth's resonance to transmit power. His backers expected profits, and his detractors saw fantasy. Funding was withdrawn, and the tower was dismantled. Over time, narratives grew. A brilliant inventor undone by the practicalities of finance, a visionary whose work was sidelined by those with different interests. Some suggest large industrial forces opposed free energy because it threatened established profit models. These are stories that stir the heart because they place human motives at the intersection of discovery and loss. Modern experiments and measurements add texture to the speculation. When researchers vibrate certain stones or expose them to electromagnetic fields, small but measurable effects occur. Some studies show that pyramid shapes can concentrate electromagnetic energy in laboratory settings. Other work demonstrates that quartz and granite will release electrons when vibrated. Taken together, these findings do not prove that the Great Pyramid was an ancient power plant, but they make the hypothesis less impossible and more intriguing. Physical materials with certain properties, arranged with astonishing precision, could interact with natural phenomena in ways early engineers might have observed and used. If you imagine Tesla standing on the Giza plateau, his tall figure bent to study the slopes, his mind mapping waves and circuits across stone and sand, you see the continuity of human curiosity. The inventor's dream of wireless transmission echoes the older dream embedded in stone, to connect, to sustain, and perhaps to transcend ordinary constraints. It is tempting to imagine that knowledge can leap across ages, an insight lost in a collapse, rediscovered by a lone genius centuries later. But history rarely follows such neat arcs. More often, ideas re-emerge in new forms, shaped by new materials and new social contexts. There are also darker threads in this weave. The idea that knowledge of free, abundant energy was suppressed after Tesla's death is a persistent narrative. Files and papers were lost or held, and financial motives did shape which technologies were developed and which were abandoned. Whether this represents organized suppression or the many small failures of human institutions is a matter for historians and careful researchers. For our purposes tonight, such stories function as reminders that technology and power are always entangled with politics, with money, and with fragile human hopes. Allow your mind to drift on a softer image. Picture the pyramid at dusk, its stones releasing the last day's warmth, a light wind passing over its faces. In the hush, suppose the stone hums a single low tone, imperceptible yet present. Imagine the earth answering with a faint counternote. Between these two, in that thin resonant space, a notion forms that human beings have always listened for patterns, and when they find one, they build. Sometimes those builds last for millennia. Sometimes they are more ephemeral. Either way, the dreaming continues. As we rest on this idea, remember that hypothesis and wonder are not the same as proof. The pyramid as power plant remains a bold and beautiful possibility that inspires experiments, conversations, and fresh ways to read the past. Whether or not the Great Pyramid once hummed like a condenser or powered a lost grid, the image of people seeking harmony with the earth, and of inventors like Tesla attempting to restore that harmony in new forms, is quietly consoling. It tells us that curiosity, persistent, precise, and patient, can reach across centuries and suggest new approaches to old problems. Chapter 7: Modern Science, Tests, and the Weight of Evidence. Settle in as the night deepens and let us breathe together, feeling the slow rhythm of curiosity guiding us now into the realm where stone meets laboratory, where millennia-old mystery is held up to the cool light of modern science. In this chapter, we will walk gently through the evidence that scholars, engineers, and experimental researchers have gathered over recent decades. We will look at the tools of dating and discovery, the little notebooks and broken pots that anchor grand claims to time, and the experiments that probe whether a pyramid can act as more than a monument, whether its shape and materials might interact with the physical world in ways that surprise us. Start with something quietly remarkable. In the last century, archaeologists have moved from merely measuring walls to reading fragments of human activity. Potsherds, ropes, graffiti scratched in stone. These small things form an archive. In the sands near Giza, archaeologists uncovered the remains of workers' villages, bakeries where loaves were baked in bulk, bone pits signalling large communal meals, and dormitory structures that housed the men who laboured on the plateau. These finds changed the tone of the debate. They suggested that construction was organised, that people rotated in crews, and that building was a social enterprise rather than only a system of forced labour. Moreover, in the early 21st century, lost papyrus scrolls were rediscovered in Wadi al-Jarf, logbooks from a man named Merah, who recorded moving limestone from the Tura quarries to Giza. That mundane detail, boats on the Nile, timetables, references to the pharaoh's building program, reads like a quiet human ledger that ties the Great Pyramid to a historical project under Khufu. The presence of such administrative records gives weight to the mainstream view. These stones were not moved by mythic giants or extraterrestrials, but by people marshalled by a state with the capacity to plan and provision at scale. Yet scientific inquiry moves beyond records into the matter itself. Stones speak in ways human handwriting does not. Modern materials science examines the chemistry and physics of limestone and granite. We know that quartz-bearing stone can produce small electrical charges when stressed, a property known as piezoelectricity. Granite, which forms the inner chambers and some structural elements of the Great Pyramid, contains such minerals. Laboratory tests have shown that under controlled vibration, certain granites can produce measurable electron emissions. This does not by itself confirm an ancient power grid. What it does do is remove a piece of automatic dismissal. The materials have properties that, if ancient builders recognized them through long observation or experimental practice, could be employed in meaningful ways. Beyond mineral properties, controlled experiments have tested the peculiar claims about geometry. In laboratory settings and in scaled models, researchers have explored whether a pyramidal shape can concentrate electromagnetic energy or create microclimatic effects. Some experiments indicate that certain geometric forms can alter the distribution of standing waves, focusing energy at nodal points. Again, this does not prove an ancient energy plant, but it makes the idea less fanciful than it might once have seemed. When you combine materials that can respond to stress with shapes that can localize waves, a sensitive and precise civilization could, in principle, notice patterns and exploit them, even without the mathematical formalism we use today. Despite these intriguing possibilities, rigorous dating methods anchor the pyramids fairly securely in the era of the Old Kingdom. Archaeologists use multiple approaches: stratigraphy to understand layered deposits, typology of pottery styles to place artifacts in relative chronology, and absolute methods such as radiocarbon dating on organic materials found in association with construction layers. When multiple lines converge, a consistent picture forms. The Great Pyramid sits in the reign of Khufu in the 4th dynasty, around 2600 BCE. The Merah logs, the workers' graffiti found in quarries and on some blocks, and the context of funerary culture all converge to place the major building activity firmly within that window. This is important. The existence of an advanced, lost civilization, older by many millennia, would need to be supported by equally strong, consistent data. And that is where mainstream archaeology remains cautious. A notable voice in the technical conversation is the internal ramp hypothesis. This engineering idea suggests that rather than a single gigantic external ramp, the builders used an internal spiral ramp poured into the structure as the pyramid rose, or a combination of external and internal ramps, levering, and precise counterweighting. Computer models and structural analyses suggest such methods could dramatically reduce the amount of labour and material required, and explain how heavy granite beams were moved into place. The internal ramp idea is elegant because it fits observed construction marks and the geometry of the monument without invoking unknown machines. Yet it remains a hypothesis, powerful and plausible, but not definitively proven without the smoking gun of preserved ramp remains. Then there is the matter of the Sphinx and the question of erosion. Some researchers point to deep weathering patterns on the Sphinx that, they argue, result from long-term rainfall, which would require a much earlier date than the conventional timeline. Other specialists counter that salt crystallization and wind-carved sand can explain these features without remote antiquity. The debate is technical and slow-moving, and it is a good example of how single pieces of evidence can be read in multiple ways. Science proceeds by testing interpretations, by proposing experiments and looking for data that would disconfirm as well as confirm. All of these threads, materials science, laboratory models, administrative papyri, excavation of workers' towns, radiocarbon dates, and structural engineering theories, form a tapestry. Some parts glimmer with possibility, others are woven tightly with conservative conclusions. The tapestry tells us two things at once. First, human creativity and organisation can be staggeringly effective. An ancient state with motivated labour, logistical mastery, and a culture of long-term projects can build monuments we still marvel at today. Second, the stones themselves are not mute. They possess measurable properties that invite study and occasionally surprise. The combination of human will and material responsiveness is a fertile ground for hypotheses that require careful, patient testing. As you listen, let your thoughts drift like sand on the wind. Consider the quiet humility of scholarship, how experts test their own conclusions and invite revision. Consider too the romance of speculation, how an idea about resonant stones or forgotten technology expands the imagination. Both impulses are part of how humans learn. Measured skepticism grounded in evidence, and playful curiosity that reaches into the unknown. In the hush of the desert night, the Great Pyramid remains both a historical anchor and an experimental stage. Modern science has illuminated many pathways, bringing clarity to some questions and revealing new ones in return. The weight of evidence leans toward a humans-built marvel of the Old Kingdom, yet the materials and geometry whisper of subtler interactions that invite further research. For now, the monument holds both certainty and possibility, and in that tension, our fascination finds its home. Chapter 8. Cataclysms, scorch marks, and the possibility of an older world. Settle deeper into your pillows and let your breathing slow as we drift into a chapter that moves gently between geology, weathered stone, and the stories science tells when it reads scars left by time. Tonight we ask a careful, soft question. Could the pyramids and the Sphinx be relics of an age far older than we usually imagine? An age when floods, storms, and cosmic events reshaped the face of the earth? We will walk through the evidence, the counter-arguments, and the quiet imagination that binds them, all in a tone meant to soothe and intrigue. Start with the Sphinx. Its lion body and human face have watched the desert for millennia, but some researchers have noticed something curious about the pattern of erosion on its body. Deep, rounded channels and vertical flutes that resemble water weathering far more than the horizontal abrasion you'd expect from wind-driven sand. Rainfall leaves a particular fingerprint on limestone, creating rounded hollows over long periods of time. But the Giza Plateau has been arid for thousands of years. If those erosional patterns were indeed caused by sustained rainfall, then the Sphinx might belong to a much earlier period, to a time when Egypt's climate was wetter, perhaps to the end of the last ice age, when large portions of the world were rearranged by melting ice, rising seas, and shifting weather patterns. This is a striking idea. Stone that remembers water, speaking to us across 10,000 years. If the Sphinx bears the traces of ancient rains, might the pyramids nearby also show signs of much older weather, or even of catastrophic events? Some researchers point to discoloration, salt deposits, and localized cracking in the pyramid stones, features they interpret as evidence of chemical alteration caused by intense heat or unusual water chemistry. When certain minerals are heated or exposed to reactive salts, they leave telltale residues, dark scorch-like marks, melted-looking glassy veins, or white crusts from the evaporated brines. A few scientists have argued that such features could be consistent with a violent event, perhaps an explosion of trapped gases, a massive fire, or other energetic phenomena that left chemical traces in the stone. There is also the theory that a hydrogen-related explosion could have occurred within ancient structures, an idea that catches the imagination because hydrogen is both ancient and invisible, and because it can be produced by simple chemical reactions of water with minerals. If rising groundwater interacted with certain rocks and created hydrogen pockets that later ignited, an internal blast could explain cracks, displaced stones, and odd scorched surfaces that look like they were not formed by ordinary wind erosion. Some researchers see patterns consistent with such an event. Fractured stones that look blown outward, not worn inward, an architecture of sudden force rather than gradual weathering. Yet the scientific method asks us to be cautious. The same kinds of marks, salt efflorescence, wind-driven sand abrasion, and centuries of microclimate changes can mimic the look of more dramatic processes. Salt crystals form when groundwater evaporates from porous limestone, and as those crystals grow, they exert pressure that flakes stone away. This process, known as salt weathering, can create pitting and scaling that might look, from a distance, like ancient waterwork or heat damage. Similarly, the accumulation of pollutants, changes in groundwater chemistry due to irrigation, or even centuries of human activity can leave traces that complicate interpretation. Careful sampling, lab work, and comparative studies are needed to separate ordinary processes from extraordinary claims. Dating is where the conversation becomes both technical and tender. Radiocarbon dating on organic material, charcoal, plant fibers, or wooden beams found in sealed contexts gives us windows into when humans were active around a site. Thermoluminescence and optically stimulated luminescence on sediments can tell us when a layer was last exposed to light or heat. When multiple methods converge, a confident chronology emerges. For the Giza complex, many lines of evidence cluster in the Old Kingdom era of Egypt, around 2600 BCE. Yet other indicators, like the weathering patterns of the Sphinx, suggest potential earlier episodes of exposure to significant rainfall. Reconciling these data points is an ongoing, sometimes slow process that requires patience and many careful measurements. One evocative proposal links these observations to the end of the Ice Age, around 11,700 to 9,700 BCE. A time when glaciers melted, sea levels rose, and global climates shifted. Some researchers suggest that rapidly rising seas or cometary impacts could have generated massive floods and atmospheric upheaval, events violent enough to erase coastal settlements, scramble timelines, and even reset regional civilizations. The idea that such a cataclysm might have destroyed an advanced culture, and that survivors later adapted or repurposed their ancestors' monuments, resonates deeply because it speaks to the fragility of knowledge and the persistence of stone. It is a poetic way of thinking about loss, whole bodies of practical know-how submerged, leaving only monolithic structures as hints. But this is where balance is essential. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To move the chronology of the pyramids back by thousands of years would require a clear, unambiguous line of dated material in situ, organic remains, tool marks, or human artifacts that can be reliably tied to those older epochs. So far, the mainstream archaeological record provides stronger signals for construction during the Old Kingdom. The Mera papyri, The workers' villages, pottery styles, and inscriptional context all speak to a vibrant construction program within the historical Egyptian framework. That does not make the water erosion observations irrelevant. It simply means the scientific conversation must continue with open minds and rigorous testing. Allow yourself to drift into a short, soft story. Imagine a coastal city at the end of an age. People harvesting grain, children playing near the water, priests watching the stars. Then the seas creep in over decades, or a sudden storm changes coastlines overnight. Families move inland, traditions shift, and the survivors carry with them fragments of architecture and ritual. They arrive in a new place and find massive stones half buried in sand, wonders whose builders they do not remember. They reuse, they revere, and they build stories into the stone where there was only engineering before. Over generations, memory and myth weave together, and the origin of the stones becomes a riddle told around household fires. In the hush of this chapter we hold two things: the patient work of science that seeks datable signals and controlled explanations, and the human instinct to read meaning into ruin. Both impulses are part of our curiosity. While some evidence suggests older climatic events left marks on the landscape, the preponderance of archaeological data still locates the major pyramid building projects in the age of Khufu and his contemporaries. Yet the Sphinx's weathering and localized chemical traces remain invitations to test, to sample, to measure with ever better tools, so that the story might be refined. As you breathe slowly now, let the mystery of conflicting evidence be a gentle lullaby rather than a source of frustration. The past is not a fixed photograph, but a slowly developing image, revealed one careful test at a time. The possibility of ancient cataclysms reshaping human history is both humbling and consoling. Humbling because it reminds us of nature's power, consoling because it offers a narrative of resilience, of people who survived, adapted, and carried forward fragments of their world into new ages. Chapter 9: Sacred Geometry, Numbers Carved in Stone. Breathe slowly and let your eyes soften. Tonight we move into a quieter room of the pyramid's mystery, a room filled with ratios, angles, and the human hunger to find order in the cosmos. Here we will trace how numbers and geometry whisper through the stone, suggesting that the builders encoded not only skill but meaning, measurements that seem to translate the earth and sky into stone. We will take our time, feeling each idea like a gentle pebble dropped into a still pool, watching the ripples expand outward. From the first glance, the Great Pyramid reads like a geometric poem. Its base is a near-perfect square, its sides aligned with remarkable fidelity to the cardinal directions, and its slopes set to form precise angles that govern the relationship between height and base. Over centuries, many observers have noticed that certain proportions, ratios between height and perimeter, the slope angles and slight irregularities, repeat with a mathematical regularity that invites interpretation. Some see elegance and symbolism, others see practical engineering choices. Either way, numbers cling to the monument like lichen to stone, persistent, sometimes subtle, and often revealing when examined closely. One of the most discussed relationships is the appearance of constants like pi and the golden ratio. Pi defined as the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, and the golden ratio, often called phi, an aesthetic proportion that appears in living things and human design. When you compare the pyramid's base perimeter to its height, some calculations find a close match to the ratio that defines a circle's circumference divided by diameter, that is, a reflection of pi. Others note that the slope and internal dimensions hint at phi in places, a proportion associated with aesthetically pleasing forms. These are not definitive proofs, and caution is wise. Patterns emerge when one looks closely enough. Still, the presence of these ratios, whether intentional or emergent, speaks to a sensitivity to proportion that the builders clearly possessed. Beyond these familiar constants, the pyramid's measurements can be read as a kind of map. Across millennia, curious minds have suggested that scaled versions of the pyramid encode planetary numbers, the Earth's circumference, the relation between base length and polar radius, and other geodetic measures. The idea is not that the builders measured the planet with satellites, but that they worked with units, proportions, and observations of the horizon that could be translated into relationships recognizable to later eyes. In other words, the stone might contain a compacted set of measurements, a manual of the world in miniature, understandable by a culture fluent in geometry and observational astronomy. Consider the pyramid's orientation. Its sides are aligned almost perfectly with true north, more precisely than many later constructions. Achieving such alignment without a magnetic compass requires skillful observation, tracking the night sky, watching circumpolar stars, and using shadows to define directions. This is an act of patient astronomy, a community watching the heavens over many nights, noting how stars return and align, and using that knowledge to orient their monuments. The alignment is not mere vanity. It is a statement that the builders were connecting their construction to the broader mechanics of the sky. There is also the curious fact of the pyramid's faint eight-sidedness. At certain times, such as the equinox, a subtle concavity appears on its faces, effectively producing 8 planes instead of 4. Some see in this an intentional design to mark solar events. Others argue that it is a byproduct of construction technique. Nevertheless, the phenomenon underlines that the monument's geometry is not static. Its appearance changes with light and season, and in those changes it can be read like a slow mechanism, turning with the cycles of the heavens. Astronomy enters the conversation again when we consider stellar alignments. The 3 main pyramids of Giza line up in a pattern that has long been compared to Orion's belt. For those who read symbolism into stone, the match is meaningful. Orion, associated with the god Osiris in Egyptian cosmology, becomes a celestial counterpart to the pharaoh's earthly monuments. Whether the match is coincidental or deliberate, the pattern suggests that the builders were keen observers of the night sky, and that they sought to place their work within the cosmological landscape of myth, ritual, and seasonal renewal. Mathematics does not stop at grand constants. Smaller details hint at counting systems, unit choices, and practical geometry. The ancient Egyptians used a cubit as a primary unit of measure. Squared-off lengths, consistent angles, and repeated modular design suggest a workshop culture that prized repeatability. Craftsmen could transfer measurements from quarry to site, from plan to stone, and in doing so, inscribe a human system of standards into each block. Imagine an architect's voice, steady and low, giving instructions. Mark 2 cubits from the edge, cut to this slope, check the squareness with the plumb. These small rituals of measurement create the monument's grand proportions. Why do people read so much into numbers? Part of the answer is psychological. We are pattern-seeking creatures, and order comforts us. Another part is symbolic. Societies often inscribe meaning into geometry. Circles for eternity, squares for earth, alignments for the divine. The pyramids, then, can be read not only as engineering projects, but as statements about place and permanence. They encode a worldview in which the ruler, the land, and the sky form a single coherent system. We should also consider the practical side of geometry. Precision helps structures last. A level base spreads weight evenly. Exact angles avoid collapse. Careful placement reduces stress in internal chambers. Some of the pyramid's apparent mathematical sophistication could therefore be explained as evolved best practice, an ancient version of engineering standards developed from experience and transmitted across generations. In this view, geometry is both symbolic language and practical toolkit. At the same time, some of the numerological claims stretch into the poetic. Coordinates that match constants, encodings of Earth measurements, and intriguing coincidences like the speed of light anecdote you mentioned earlier. Here, humility is wise. Coincidences occur when numbers are copious. Given enough dimensions, measurements, and units, patterns can be found that align with almost anything. This does not render every numerical observation meaningless. Rather, it signals that we must weigh each claim with context. How many degrees of freedom are present? How many possible interpretations exist? And whether there is cultural evidence that the builders intentionally encoded a particular constant. Let us drift into a small tale to hold these ideas in a calmer light. Picture a master mason and his apprentice one evening. Lanterns low, stars bright above. The master traces a circle in the sand and then a line across the dunes, teaching the apprentice how the horizon shifts with seasons, and how a shadow's length can reveal the day's angle. Numbers, he says softly, are our way of keeping the sky honest. They remind us when the flood will come, when the seeds must be sown, and where the pharaoh's house will point to the stars. The apprentice learns not only the tradesman's skill, but the symbolic language behind each measurement. In that exchange, numbers become cultural memory, embedded in building, ritual, and the songs that pass from hand to hand. As you listen, notice how geometry binds the human and the cosmic. Measuring makes the world legible. Aligning makes it meaningful. Whether the pyramid's numbers were intended as a technical manual, a ritual text, or an aesthetic choice, they reveal a culture that thought deeply in scales, small and large, stone and sky. The monument becomes a map of relationships, human labour organised into form, the earth measured into proportion, and the heavens echoed in stone. In the end, sacred geometry is as much about perception as precision. It invites us to recognise the human impulse to turn the chaotic into the ordered, to translate experience into units that can be passed forward. The pyramids, then, are not just feats of lifting stone, they're acts of translation, turning lived knowledge of stars, floods, and seasons into a language that could survive centuries of silence. Chapter 10. The Pyramid Power Plant. Materials, mechanics, and the music of stone. Breathe in slowly, exhale, and let the steady hush of the night carry you forward as we enter a chapter that listens closely to stone. Tonight we follow a careful question. If the Great Pyramid was more than a tomb, if its builders tuned it in some way to the world around it, then how might that have worked in practice? We will walk gently through the elements that make this idea plausible to some, materials that respond to vibration, chambers that shape sound, water moving like a hidden river through rock, and also the reasons scientists remain cautious. The path is part lab bench, part poetic imagining, and every step will be slow and clear. Begin with the stone itself. The pyramid is not made of a single uniform rock. The outer casing was once bright Tura limestone, quarried and transported with care. Inside, especially in the king's chamber and sections of the internal structure, lie granite blocks rich in quartz and other minerals. Quartz is a material that does something quiet and interesting when pressed or vibrated. It generates small electrical charges. This property, piezoelectricity, is a simple measurable effect. Granite too contains minerals that release electrons under stress. These are not miracles. They are properties you can test in a laboratory. But the presence of these materials invites a question. Might the builders have noticed that certain stones behave differently when struck, perhaps glowing faintly, humming, or producing sparks under certain conditions. Imagine generations of craftsmen tapping stones, feeling vibrations, noting differences. This slow empirical sensing could build practical knowledge without formal equations. Now consider architecture as a kind of instrument. The pyramid's internal layout, the grand gallery, the ascending passages, the relatively sealed king's chamber, create spaces where sound behaves in particular ways. Long, sloping passages can focus acoustic energy. Corners and cavities can trap standing waves. Some researchers have proposed that if the pyramid were exposed to low-frequency vibration, natural ground motion, flowing water, human-made percussion, those waves could be concentrated at nodal points. In these nodes, the local effects on piezoelectric minerals would be stronger. Picture, if you will, a gentle drumbeat in a large hall that, after many repetitions, causes a single spot on the floor to vibrate more than the rest. The physics is subtle, but real. Geometry determines how waves travel. Water adds another layer. The Nile and its canals were the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. And some theories propose that engineered aquifers or channels beneath and around a structure could move water in ways that generate pressure, gas, or resonance. When water interacts with minerals under pressure, chemical reactions can produce gases, hydrogen among them. Hydrogen is a light, flammable gas, and if trapped and ignited, could in theory cause localized explosions or energetic releases. Proposals drawing on this chemistry suggest scenarios where engineered flows produced effects that ancient engineers observed and possibly harnessed. This is a delicate hypothesis because it requires many contingencies to align: specific rock chemistry, channeling of water, containment, and timing. Each of these is testable, but the tests are complex. There are also small archaeological finds that fuel speculation. Reports surfaced in the early 21st century of a copper wire-like artifact found in the pyramid's relieving chambers, an oddity because copper corrodes and ancient wiring would be unexpected. Some interpret such finds as hints that conductive pathways existed. Others caution that the context is unclear. Copper was used widely across ancient Egypt for tools and decorative items, and a single artifact does not prove an electrical grid. In the same way, laboratory experiments in modern times have shown that pyramid-shaped models can concentrate certain electromagnetic effects under particular conditions, and that some granites emit electrons when vibrated. These studies do not confirm a functioning ancient power station, but they keep the idea of energy-focused architecture within the boundaries of physical possibility. Nikola Tesla enters this story not because he travelled back in time, but because his modern experiments echo older imaginings. Tesla's dream of wireless transmission used principles that treat the planet as a resonant body, excite it at the right frequency and energy can travel. His Wardenclyffe Tower attempted to use the ground and the atmosphere as a medium for energy. Whether or not the pyramid was ever used in anything like this way, the conceptual similarity is striking. Both ideas hinge on resonance, coupling, and geometry. Where Tesla had copper coils, dynamos, and the equations of electromagnetism, an ancient builder would have had stone, water, and long observation. Different tools, similar curiosities. It is important to tread gently here with skepticism and method. The jump from materials have responsive properties to the pyramid was a deliberate power plant is large. For that claim to stand, we would need clear archaeological evidence of intent, tooling and installations that indicate energy harnessing, repeated artifacts that suggest wiring or storage, sealed channels designed for fluid-mediated reactions, and unambiguous chemical signatures tied to operation. To date, these elements are not present in the strong form needed to overturn the mainstream view that the pyramid is a funerary and ceremonial monument of the Old Kingdom. That does not negate curiosity, it simply frames it. Scientists are drawn to testable hypotheses, and many of the intriguing claims about pyramid energetics are being approached with experiments precisely because they are testable. Let your mind follow a small imagined scene to hold these ideas softly. Picture a sandstone workshop one evening. A mason taps a slab and notices a faint spark when it strikes a particular vein of stone. He takes note, mentions it to an elder, and over decades the craft masters teach apprentices where to place certain stones to catch the wind or the river's pulse. Elsewhere, a ritualist listens to the way a chant reverberates down a passage and marks the place where the sound rings most clearly. Over generations, these practical observations accumulate into patterned practice. Whether those patterns add up to a functioning power grid or a sophisticated ritual technology is a question that invites both lab work and imagination. For retention and wonder, consider this. Science often advances by returning to old questions with new tools. What seemed fanciful in one age becomes testable in another. Experiments that measure microelectric currents, careful chemical analyses of trapped salts, 3D acoustic modelling, and ground-penetrating radar can all bring fresh data to ancient hypotheses. Each new measurement can either close a possibility or shine a light on an unexpected corner. So as you relax now, hold both ideas lightly. The pyramid as a monument of human devotion and engineering, and the pyramid as a structure with material properties that might interact with the environment in surprising ways. Both readings enrich our sense of what past people noticed, how they learned, and how knowledge can be encoded in stone. The questions remain open, inviting patient inquiry rather than sudden certainty. Chapter 11. Secrets, Suppression, and the Slow Politics of Invention. Breathe in slowly and let your shoulders drop as we settle into another quiet chapter. Tonight we follow a gentle but persistent thread that ties invention to money, to reputation, and to the small decisions that shape which ideas flourish and which quietly fade away. We will look at Nikola Tesla again, at Wardenclyffe and vanished papers, and at a larger, calmer question: how does society choose which technologies to keep, which to shelve, and which to forget? We will do this in a way that is careful, balanced, and easy to follow, because the history of ideas is rarely a straight line, and because the fate of knowledge often depends on human institutions as much as on genius. Think of an invention like a seed. For a seed to grow into a tree, you need more than good genetics. You need soil, water, sunlight, and the absence of destructive forces. In technology, soil and water are people and institutions, patrons, funders, legal systems, manufacturing capacity, and the markets that buy what is made. Tesla's life provides a good, gentle mirror for this truth. He had ideas that were often decades ahead of their time, visions of wireless transmission, of tapping the earth itself as a medium for energy. He also lived in a world of investors, banks, and rivals, people who expected returns, who judged ideas by whether they could be turned into profit within a manageable time frame. Wardenclyffe was Tesla's great practical experiment in this dream. He envisioned a tower that might couple to atmospheric and ground modes to transmit power and information across distances. He attracted interest and some funding, but the resources required ballooned as the project's scale and novelty became clear. One investor who initially engaged with Tesla later retreated when the economic model remained uncertain. There are many ways to explain that retreat: simple financial caution, disappointment in early results, and the pressures investors face when risk grows beyond what they anticipated. Over time, narratives grew that framed this retreat as deliberate suppression by powerful interests who feared the disruptive impact of free, wireless power. These narratives are compelling because they speak to a deep human theme, that entrenched systems resist changes that threaten their foundations. It's important to be precise about what historians can support and where speculation begins. Financial withdrawal, failed ventures, and competitive patent battles are documented facts in many histories of innovation. Large companies and investors have, in many eras, chosen to back technologies that fit their portfolios and to withdraw from those they judge too risky. Patent litigation, public, drawn out, and often bitter, has also shaped which inventions find markets. Yet drawing a straight line from those ordinary market processes to an organised conspiracy to suppress a specific technology requires evidence beyond financial decisions and disappointed inventors. Where evidence is thin, it is kinder to say that motives are complex and mixed. Self-interest, risk aversion, bureaucratic inertia, and sometimes short-sightedness all play roles. Broadening our view beyond Tesla, consider the general relationship between technological novelty and vested interests. New energy concepts threaten existing infrastructures. Coal mines, oil wells, rail networks, centralized power monopolies, because they could change who profits and who controls distribution. When an invention threatens a business model, resistance can arise in many forms: lobbying for regulation that slows adoption, patent strategies that block competitors, preferential financing for familiar technologies, and social narratives that label new ideas as fringe until they are rehabilitated by time and testing. These processes are rarely neat or conspiratorial. They are messy human systems reacting to uncertainty. Sometimes the reaction delays beneficial change. Other times it protects consumers from premature, unsafe technologies. Now imagine how this dynamic might play out across millennia. If an ancient civilization discovered a method to harness natural resonances, that knowledge would have required sustained social structures to preserve and apply it. Schools to pass technical methods, workshops to produce the small parts or channels, trade networks to distribute materials, and political stability to maintain the infrastructure. Catastrophe, migration, or economic collapse would all jeopardize that continuity. Lost knowledge does not always result from deliberate suppression. It more often results from the slow erosion of the social scaffolding that supports complex techniques. A wall collapse, a change of religious ritual, or the loss of a key quarry can all mean that a technique fades away. In this gentle light, the parallel between Tesla's modern struggles and ancient loss is not that someone actively burned blueprints, but that fragile systems can fail when the conditions supporting them change. There are also quieter forms of suppression, or forgetting we should acknowledge. Cultural stigma can marginalize knowledge. Practices associated with disfavored groups or taboo rituals may be omitted from official records. Records themselves may decay. Papyrus, wood, and textiles rot far faster than stone. Where writing is scarce or inaccessible, practical knowledge can survive only in craftspeople's hands and oral traditions, and those hands and voices are vulnerable to displacement. Imagine, for a moment, a guild of stoneworkers whose trade secrets are encoded in gestures and chants rather than in durable books. If that guild scatters and the apprentices vanish, the technique vanishes with them. This slow attrition is not dramatic, but it is very real. Let us pause for a soft story that ties these threads together. Picture a small riverside workshop centuries ago. A master teaches apprentices a method of shaping stone that makes a certain acoustic effect possible. They build a device that, when the river runs a particular way, amplifies a low hum. The technique is useful when the society cares about it. Maybe for ritual, maybe for practical reasons. But when the river shifts course and the patron dies in a war, interest wanes. The apprentices disperse. The knowledge becomes a tale told by a few elders. then a song that loses technical detail, then finally a fable. Across time, the device remains a silent witness, its original purpose misted over by centuries. This picture is not conspiracy. It is the common fate of fragile practices in a shifting world. Returning to the modern era, it is worth noting that innovation is not always crushed. Sometimes it is absorbed in altered forms. Tesla's ideas about wireless transmission seeded later work in radio, in alternating current systems, and in our understanding of electromagnetic propagation. Even failed projects teach engineers what does not work and refine methods for the next wave of invention. The cultural afterlife of an idea can be indirect. Fragments survive and later recombine into new, often unexpected technologies. So suppression in human history is rarely absolute. It is a filtering process where elements are lost, others survive, and new patterns form from the residue. As you breathe now, let the lesson settle like soft sand. The fate of knowledge is shaped by many human factors: economics, chance, disaster, cultural preference, and the stubborn materiality of things that rot or endure. The stories that claim deliberate, organised suppression of energy technologies are powerful and often emotionally satisfying. But we must balance them with an understanding of how ordinary institutional dynamics and environmental change also produce loss. Both kinds of narratives can coexist. Deliberate obstruction sometimes happens, and fragile systems failing by accident happens often. Finally, consider the hopeful note that underlies this chapter. The recovery of lost knowledge is possible. Scholars, archaeologists and engineers work slowly and patiently to test materials, to model acoustics, to read inscriptions, and to excavate the daily life of ancient people. Technology also evolves. Tools for scanning, dating, and material analysis give us new ways to interrogate old stones. In some cases, what was once dismissed as fantasy becomes testable science. The interplay of curiosity, patience, and method can resurrect ideas from the rubble, or at least explain why they lived and why they were forgotten. Chapter 12: Ritual, Resonance, and the Human Experience. Breathe in slowly and let the air move gently through you as we step into a quieter room of the pyramid story, one filled with footsteps, breath, song, and scent. Tonight we explore an idea that sits comfortably between material fact and lived experience. The pyramids and their surrounding spaces as places of ritual, acoustic design, and human encounter. We will wander through the ways people might have used sound, procession, and sensory practice inside and around the monuments, and how those practices could turn a static stone mass into a living stage for the most intimate and communal moments of a culture. Imagine approaching the plateau at dawn. The horizon is soft and pale. The silhouette of the pyramid cuts the sky like a slow, sure breath. People gather, craftsmen, priests, families, each carrying tokens for ritual, small jars of oil, woven mats, simple instruments of percussion or flute. They move with deliberation. Processions in ancient cultures were rarely chaotic. Each step is measured, each turning point remembered by story or marker. As we walk with them, notice how the landscape itself participates. The stones underfoot retain the day's cool, the wind arrives with a thin, salt-dry voice, and the light slips along the faces in bands that last only a few minutes. These temporal moments matter. They make the mountain of stone a calendar as much as a structure. Ritual in ancient Egypt was not only about spectacle, it was a technology of meaning, a way to keep the social fabric coherent and to bind the living to the world of ancestors and gods. The pyramid, in that sense, functioned as a focus for ritual energies, both symbolic and practical. Offerings were carried into courtyards, incense was burned to cleanse the air, and priests chanted names and genealogies in rhythms repeated until they entered the body as felt pattern. Sound shapes experience. A long sustained chant in a passage with reflective stone will change in texture as it travels, producing echoes, standing waves, and subtle beats that the human ear and body register not only as sound but as physical presence. Imagine the low tones of many voices chanting a name or a formula. The sound pools in the grand gallery and seems to touch the ribs, sinking breath among those present. This bodily synchronization, shared breath and pulse, creates communal calm and a sense of aligned intent. In modern terms, ritual acoustics are a technology of social cohesion. Consider the interiors for a moment. The Grand Gallery, with its long slope and smooth faces, is not acoustically neutral. Long corridors emphasize low frequencies, letting them stand longer, while chambers with hard, flat walls produce clear, focused reflections. A chant that is somber and low can become thick and enveloping. A higher flute note might sparkle and dance along the walls, producing shimmering overtones. If ritualists noticed these effects, they could intentionally place certain rites in particular spaces to produce desired psychological states: calm, awe, mourning, or ecstatic release. This is not mystical, it is practical anthropology. Cultures around the world use architecture to shape experience. In caves, temples, and concert halls, geometry and materials shape how we feel. Sound is only one sense in this ritual equation. Smell matters too. The ancient Egyptians used incense, oils, and resin in many ceremonies. A small jar of frankincense heated on a brazier will perfume an enclosed chamber with smoke that softens light and makes breath visible. Scent ties memory to place powerfully. A single whiff can return a person to a childhood moment. In a sacred passage, scent can make a remembered line of chant more vivid, binding cultural memory to physical architecture. Light is equally significant. Many rituals were timed to specific solar events: sunrise, sunset, and the moments when light carves a particular line into a chamber or grazes a relief. A shaft of sunlight entering a corridor at a certain day of the year can be designed to touch a statue or illuminate a symbol for only a few minutes, creating a ritual hinge point. These temporal alignments turn stone into a slow clock and ritual into choreography with the heavens. Let us pause and imagine a small, intimate scene inside the pyramid's lower corridors. A group of initiates stands in a semicircle. The leader speaks a name in a low voice, and the group responds in a measured cadence. The sound rolls down the corridor, hits a concave surface, and returns a softened echo. The initiates close their eyes and feel the returning sound not only in their ears but in their bones. The leader then lights a small bowl of perfumed resin. The smoke rises slowly, carrying the scent of cedar and myrrh. A single narrow shaft of afternoon light slices through a slotted opening, gilding the smoke and turning it to a moving column of gold. An experience like that is not easily forgotten. It binds the person to a narrative of lineage, place, and meaning. From an experiential perspective, rituals can also serve practical ends. They structure labour and create social calendars, harvest rituals, offerings to ensure flooding, rites to consecrate tools, and commemoration of important leaders. Ceremonies around the pyramid could have served to integrate large labour forces, providing stops in the daily flow where chants and shared meals reasserted social bonds. In a pre-industrial society where cohesion matters for large projects like pyramid construction, ritual functions as much as religion. It is the grease that keeps enormous social machines running smoothly. Modern experimental archaeology has echoed these intuitions. Researchers rehearsal imitations of ancient chants in replica chambers and measure how sound behaves. They note that specific frequencies resonate more strongly in some spaces, and that the human threshold for feeling rather than hearing vibrations is surprisingly low. In some studies, people in resonant spaces report altered states, slowed perception, feelings of vastness, or enhanced emotion. These are not supernatural outcomes, but very human psychophysiological responses to shared sensory stimulation. Ritual architectures that exploited such properties would effectively tune group states in ways beneficial for social cohesion, memory, and belief formation. There is also the symbolic language of materials. Granite, polished and dark, reflects differently than pale limestone. Polished surfaces make light behave differently, reflecting a bright consciousness that can be used to represent the sun or a divine presence. The choice to line a chamber with quartz-rich stone could have been aesthetic, durable, or symbolic. Quartz catches light and may sparkle faintly, giving an impression of inner luminescence when touched by flame or sunbeams. Such tactile and visual qualities amplify the sensory experience and help materialize metaphors. Stone as flesh, light as spirit. This brings us to another layer. The politics of access. Not everyone enters every space. Sacred architecture often restricts who may pass through which door. Access codes, priestly lineages, initiation grades, gender rules, shape who experiences certain chambers and at what stage in life. The pyramid could therefore hold multiple experiential strata, spaces for public offering, areas for specialist rituals, and inner sanctums for the initiated. Each space scaffolds different knowledge, some practical, some ceremonial. This controlled dissemination of experience can preserve technical knowledge within specialist groups, while allowing the broader population to maintain faith and cohesion through more public symbolic rituals. A small, calming story again. Imagine a young apprentice who, after years of craft work, is taken into a chamber she is only known by hearsay. The leader asks her to place her ear to a carved stone and listen. She hears a hum, a low, patient vibration, and the leader whispers, "This is how we remember the river." The apprentice learns that the stone's song is a way to carry memory across generations, an embodied archive of both place and practice. For cultures without extensive written archives, these embodied practices, chant, scent, light and touch, become repositories of knowledge. They are living books whose pages are felt rather than read. As we consider this, recognize a subtle but important point. The experiential reading of the pyramid does not require us to assert that the monument was a power plant or an ancient machine. It requires only that the builders were sensitive to material, light, sound, and time, and that they used those sensitivities to shape communal life. The idea that ritual practice can encode technical information in embodied form is plausible and widely attested in many cultures. Knowledge can be preserved in gestures, in seasonal timings, and in the alignment of stones. Finally, hold this thought as you breathe. Human beings create meaning through shared sensory worlds. The pyramids, then, can be read as masterworks of sensory architecture, places designed to be experienced, felt, and remembered. Whether their greatest intent was to store energy, to house kings, or to mark the sky, they functioned as stages where communities enacted their cosmology. For a person in the warm hush of a ritual chamber, the monument was not inert. It was a living presence that shaped breath, song, and story. Chapter 13. Memory, Myth, and Modernity. Breathe slowly, and let your mind rest in the warm hush as we trace how the pyramids live inside the human imagination, how stone becomes story, how scholarship and speculation mingle, and how the monuments continue to shape our modern world in ways both tender and complicated. Tonight we follow a long, gentle arc from ancient oral memory to the loud, bright era of mass media, from careful archaeology to myth-making on the internet, and from tourism that sustains local communities to the urgent work of conserving a fragile legacy. We will move slowly, laying each idea down like a pebble on sand, watching the ripples build. The pyramids first entered human memory as part of daily life. For the generations that raised and tended them, these structures were landmarks of ritual, labour, and identity. Stories about their origins circulated at hearthside, tales of kings and gods, of craftsmen proud of their work, of seasons marked by processions that threaded the community together. Oral memory shaped meaning differently than written records. A song passed down over decades might emphasize sacrifice. A teacher might encode technical measurements in chant, and a community's identity could gather around the monument as a shared anchor. In that way, the stones were living mnemonic devices, repositories of practical and cultural knowledge that people carried into everyday life. As literacy and record-keeping spread, the pyramids acquired new textual lives. Herodotus recorded tales he heard centuries after construction, blending observation with local legend. Egyptian priests left sparse notes and architecture carried symbolic messages. Later, medieval travellers brought back new impressions, and each telling reframed the past for a different audience. Over time, the monuments accumulated layers of narrative that sometimes complemented the archaeological record and sometimes complicated it. Memory and material did not always agree, but both contributed to a fuller picture of how people relate to monumental things. Fast forward to the modern era, and notice how a new technology, printing followed by photography, film, radio, television, and now the internet, accelerated and amplified stories about the pyramids. Early photographers captured the scale and beauty of the plateau in grainy sepia. Filmmakers dreamed up scenes of adventure and discovery. Radio commentators fed public hunger for exotic tales. With each technology, the pyramids were refracted into new genres: scholarly monograph, pulp fiction, television documentaries, conspiracy videos, and blockbuster films. The variety is dizzying, and the effect is simple. When millions of people can see and share an image or a theory, ideas spread quickly and stick in ways oral histories once could not. This modern circulation has blessings and hazards. On the positive side, popular interest has driven funding for excavations, inspired careers in archaeology, and created global empathy for ancient cultures. People who watch a documentary or visit the plateau can come to care about the stones and the lives that created them. Tourism, when managed with thought and care, supports local economies. It pays for guides, for hotels, for food vendors, and for some forms of conservation. A family in a nearby town may depend on visitors for their livelihood, and the cultural exchange that occurs when people meet across language and time can be quietly transformative. But the modern era also brings myths that spread like fire. Sensational theories, aliens, ancient power plants, secret cabals thrive because they satisfy emotional needs, the wish for wonder, the allure of secret knowledge, and the human taste for dramatic narratives. In the internet age, confirmation bias finds a friend. Algorithmic feeds amplify content that provokes strong feeling, and that means spectacular claims can travel faster than careful nuance. A single poorly sourced video or an evocative but unverified photograph can seed 1,000 retellings. The result is an ecology where serious scholarship must work harder to be heard, and where curiosity can tip into credulity when not paired with method. Archaeology responds to this challenge with patience and method. Excavation is slow, deliberate, and often painstakingly boring. Sieving sand, cataloguing fragments, conducting chemical tests, and publishing careful papers. when new finds appear, an inscribed block, a worker's diary, a radiocarbon series. Experts test, replicate, and debate. Peer review can be slow, but it is designed to prevent leaps from evidence to fancy. The scientific approach values convergence, multiple lines of inquiry that point to the same conclusion. This is why the mainstream dating of the pyramids to the Old Kingdom rests on many convergent signals: pottery styles, administrative logs, worker camps, radiocarbon dates, and stylistic continuity across monuments. Yet archaeology is also open to revision when robust new evidence emerges. The history of science is full of tales where patient work overturned confident assumptions, but those reversals come through measurable proof rather than viral claim. The modern relationship between myth and material also affects conservation. Stone is durable, but not invulnerable. Air pollution, rising groundwater, tourism foot traffic, and the slow creep of salt crystallization threaten surfaces and joinery. Conservators must balance the desire for public access against the need to preserve. Managing that balance involves technical choices: where to allow visitors, how to ventilate chambers, which surfaces to stabilize, and human ones, how to involve local stakeholders, how to fund long-term work, and how to share stewardship in a way that respects both heritage and community. Projects that succeed often combine scientific expertise with local knowledge and priorities. When visitors encounter well-informed guides who explain both the wonder and the evidence, the result is deeper respect and better outcomes for the monument. There is also a human ethics that comes with interpretation. Popular narratives can either honour or appropriate the cultures that produce the monuments. Responsible storytelling seeks to centre the descendants of those cultures and to avoid exoticizing or reducing them to props in someone else's tale. This is a subtle and important point. The pyramids are not only global curiosities, they are part of living traditions. Engaging respectfully means listening to Egyptian scholars, to local communities, and to practitioners whose identities are tied to these places. It means funding local museums, supporting education, and avoiding narratives that erase the voice of people who live closest to the stones. At the level of ideas, the pyramids have become lenses through which we project contemporary anxieties and hopes. The power plant theory, for example, speaks to modern hopes for clean, free energy and to mistrust of entrenched interests. Tales of lost civilizations embody fears about fragile systems and a yearning for simpler golden ages. Alien hypotheses reflect our interest in cosmic contact. Each theory tells us as much about our present as it pretends to tell us about the past. Recognizing this helps us hold these myths kindly. They are human responses to mystery, and they also invite critical thinking about the evidence that supports or contradicts them. For the viewer who has listened this long, there is a soft practical point worth carrying forward. Wonder and rigour can coexist. You can feel awe at the sight of a pyramid and also care that a claim be tested. You can enjoy a speculative idea while asking for the data behind it. This balanced curiosity is what moves public discourse away from polarization and toward informed curiosity. It is also how good questions become testable experiments and how myths can inspire research that yields new knowledge. Finally, think of the pyramids as teachers in another gentle sense. They teach patience. They ask us to look across long time spans. They teach humility. They remind us that stone can outlast empires and that knowledge can be fragile. They teach stewardship. They call us to care for what the centuries entrusted to us. As you breathe now, let those lessons settle softly. The stones are older than our modern debates and kinder than our urgent claims. They offer a long view, one that invites us to listen, to test, to tell stories that honour both the past and the present. Chapter 14. The Great Machine of Supply. food, labour and the economy that built the stones. Settle deeper into your blanket of calm as we turn now to a less romantic but profoundly human part of the story. The everyday logistics that made the pyramids possible. If the pyramids are mountains of stone, they are also mountains of supply lines, of food, tools, timber, rope, boats, and steady hands. This chapter gently follows the invisible threads of provisioning and organisation that turn a grand idea into reality, showing how an entire economy can become a living support system for a centuries-long project. We will feel the rhythm of labour, smell the bread baking in communal ovens, and listen to the quiet order of records and lists that made empire-scale construction manageable. Imagine the plateau at dawn not as empty stone but as a city unfolding. Tents and barracks line the edges, ovens warm with baking, and great vats bubble with the grainy mash that would be turned into bread and beer. Food is the simplest measure of capacity. 1,000 workers need thousands of loaves. 10,000 multiply that requirement tenfold. Supplying such numbers demands planning on a scale that rivals any modern logistics operation. Fields had to be harvested, granaries filled, boats packed, and routes planned so that food could flow from farms to construction camps precisely when needed. The rhythm of the Nile shaped much of this flow. For much of the year, the flood made fields fertile and transport by boat easier. For other months, the river's level changed, and overland transport became more practical. Many historians and archaeologists think the annual inundation was harnessed as part of the timetable. When the fields were underwater and farmers were relatively idle, labour could be mobilised to work on the monuments. This seasonal labour model is elegant. Agricultural cycles create windows of availability. The state organises labour during those windows and then returns people to the fields when the rains or floods demand attention again. It is a system that both uses and respects the natural pace of life. Transport is the next thread. Stone quarries often lay far from the construction site. Tura limestone and other fine casing stones were quarried at a distance and loaded onto boats. Imagine teams of men guiding barges through canals cut close to the plateau, lowering ramps and hauling stones onto prepared ramps. The sight and sound of coordinated crews, pullers on ropes, oarsmen synchronizing strokes, and overseers calling orders would have been constant. Water is a gentle conveyor compared to dragging a weight over sand, and the Egyptians were masters at exploiting it. Simple engineering, locks, canals, and temporary harbours carved into the landscape could turn a distant quarry into a local supplier. On land, ingenuity matters. Experimental archaeology has shown how lubrication, pouring water on sand in front of sledges, can drastically reduce friction, allowing fewer men to pull heavier loads. Sledges, rollers, and carefully crafted wooden sledges allowed teams to move multi-ton blocks with surprising efficiency. Rope making, too, was essential. Long, strong ropes made from plant fibres or leather were produced in large workshops. These are humble crafts, but without them, the stone does not move. Tools and craft specialisation form another layer. Copper chisels, dolerite pounding stones, wooden mallets, and abrasive sand were used to shape and dress the blocks. Though copper is softer than iron or bronze, with skill and repeated hammering it could produce precise surfaces. Stoneworkers developed techniques, scoring, wedging, heating and cooling, to fracture rock along desired lines. Polishing and finishing required patience and repeated abrasion. Think of master masons teaching apprentices over years. These are the hands that created the smooth faces that once gleamed in sunlight. Workshops likely existed near quarries to shape stones to rough dimensions before transport, and final dressing occurred on site as needed. Administrative control, records of who, when and how much, was the silent engine behind it all. Ostraca, potsherd notes, logbooks, and administrative papyri served as the ancient project management software. Lists of workers, receipts for rations, assignments to gangs, and details about deliveries. These mundane records, when they survive, are as telling as any monumental inscription. They reveal a staggering attention to detail. How many loaves issued to a gang that day? Which crew had completed a task and which boat brought a particular batch of limestone? The existence of such records shows that building the pyramid was a planned bureaucratic act, not random or purely coercive. Health and welfare were practical concerns that the administration had to address. Large numbers of men living together require sanitation, medical care, and supply of clean water. Archaeological evidence of bakeries, butcher pits, and medical implements suggest a level of care for workers. Healed fractures and skeletons, specialized treatment of wounds, and organized funerary rites indicate that these workers were integrated members of the society, not expendable labor. The supply of beer and bread was not charity. It was an economic necessity. Nourished workers are effective workers, and the state understood this. Housing and rotation of labour kept morale and productivity higher than a permanent gang of slaves might sustain. Evidence points to worker villages where men lived seasonally, returned to their villages between campaigns, and perhaps received rations and pay in goods. This kind of system fosters skill transmission. Apprenticeship becomes possible when elders return yearly to teach, and sustains a core of experienced craftsmen whose knowledge accumulates across generations. Timber supply, often overlooked, is another vital factor. Wood was needed for sledges, rollers, scaffolding, and fuel. Egypt's own timber was limited, requiring import from afar or careful economy in use. The logistics of moving timber, sometimes from the Levant, adds yet another supply chain into the picture. Each imported beam required coordination, negotiation, shipping, and payment. The complexity grows when you see the pyramid as embedded in a wider economy of trade and diplomacy. Financing the endeavour involved resources beyond rations. Temples, land grants, and taxation supported labour and materials. The state's ability to mobilise resources through grain taxation, corvée labour, and storage reflects a sophisticated economic apparatus. The pyramid project was thus also a project of governance, a way for rulers to structure society, redistribute surplus, and assert control through public works that also held religious meaning. Finally, consider the social rhythms that such projects create. A generation grows up knowing of the pyramid's work as a repeated seasonal task. Fathers who worked become foremen, sons learn the craft, and rituals bind the labour to the calendar. The monument is not only a finished object, it is a long-lived social program that shapes culture, economy, and identity across decades. For a society to sustain such projects requires not just resources but shared purpose, stories, religion, and authority that make the labour meaningful. As you breathe now, imagine the steady hum of this great machine of supply. Boats sliding through early morning mist, ovens releasing warm bread, teams of masons tapping and polishing, overseers checking lists in the shade. The pyramids may begin with a vision, but they are realized in thousands of ordinary acts, in a network of people and goods organized into a living economy. Thinking of the monuments this way honors not only the grandeur of the stones, but also the daily labors that made them possible. The bakers, rope makers, boatmen, masons, and clerks, whose small tasks together built something that lasts across millennia.